already accounted for. Right. So brachioradialis, check. Biceps brachii, check. Brachialis, check. Okay, so let's get to our specialty pronators and supinators, and then we'll finish off with our triceps and acromions. Some good practice. We can come back to this one if you guys want. We're doing some practice of the brachioradialis. All right, Anconius. We'll do that. We'll go in order. So the Anconius is the way I like to, it's not the same, but it's similar. You know, you got your knee and your elbow are both hinges. Obviously, your knee's a modified hinge. But if you look at the elbow on an X-ray, it darn near looks like a knee. The olecranon is really the upper extremities version of your patella, so very similar. So just like you have 4 quad muscles at the knee, you technically have 4 extensors at the elbow. Your triceps brachii, medial lateral, and long head, and your Anconius is your 4th. So this is a muscle that goes humerus to ulna, and it crosses posterior, crosses in the back of the elbow. So it's an elbow extension for. In addition, you can look at the obliqueness of it, and it's like, well, but there's no rotation. But in terms of the stability, like remember, these muscles aren't just for movement; they're also there to help stabilize those joints. So if you're wondering about that kind of obliqueness to it, the up and down is going to be the rotary component, and the across is the stability component. The good old Anconius. So I'll give an example of where students might miss this. You're so used to hearing bicep, tricep, bicep, tricep. On the test, I might give you some elbow extensor agonist and ask you about the Anconius. Just know that the Anconius is an elbow extensor. All right, here is the famous triceps. Okay, so your tricep has 3 heads. You have your medial, you have your lateral, and you have your long. The long head of the tricep would be like the rectus femoris. Not exactly, but just as an example of a muscle that has a function distally and one head goes up and crosses into the ball and socket. Okay. Your medial, the one more on the inside, your lateral, the one more on the outside, and then the long. They blend into this big white tendon sheath. So this would be your medial head more on the inside, your lateral head more on the outside. Notice your medial and lateral do not cross into the shoulder, like your vasti do not cross into the hip. Okay? Uni, and then bi. And when I say bi, I mean biaxial, crosses into something else. So there's your triceps brachii, long head. So for verbiage, if I say triceps brachii, this is, I know you're not going to miss this because we made that mistake with the biceps femoris, right? If I say, what does the triceps brachii do? And I just word it like that. Another way of saying that is, hey, what do all 3 heads do? And all 3 heads only function as elbow extensors. Only the long head crosses into the shoulder. So I can't say the triceps brachii functions at the shoulder because all 3 heads do not function at the shoulder. Is it tricky? It can be, but if you understand the nuance of it, it won't be tricky, and you're gonna be like, I can't wait for him to ask what the triceps brachii does. Let's go into our So all we have left are our rotators. Yes. These are the easiest muscles in class, in my opinion, because they have function as part of their name. Love them. So you have pronator teres. I'm going to try to demonstrate practically how that muscle works. So it's going to start on the inside of the elbow. It does cross the elbow. It is a weak elbow flexor. But if you think about it, you have your biceps, your brachialis, and your brachialis basically loading up the box score. It's really a secondary elbow flexor. And I told you I'm only going to give you the prime, the major ones, okay? But if you're like, well, wouldn't it be crossing the elbow? You're right. No problem. But more than anything, this muscle crosses and pulls on the radius, and it pulls in a direction of pronation. How many of you have ever seen or studied in class spine boarding, where somebody has a neck injury and you got to spine board them, and you have to have someone at the head, you have to have someone at the body, because so if you think about it, if they're on their back, you're going to need someone at the feet, someone in their body, and someone at the head. And if they're on their back, the first motion while you put the board is you're going to give them some pronation. The act of going prone, right? They're supine. The act of going prone. So for us, we have somebody that's going to be a pronation puller like on the body, and then we're going to have somebody at the feet. And the muscle at the feet is that distal muscle called the pronator quadratus. It's like the spine board at the feet. Now, if you look at it, you're like, that muscle doesn't really give me function based off this whole. First of all, it looks like a little sliver of like beef jerky that you would get, but remember, which bone rotates about the other bone? The ulna's fixed, right? The ulna doesn't rotate about the radius moves about the ulna. So the ulna is anchored and the radius moves traditionally. So if you think about it, if you go to the ulna, which is right there, that part's going to be anchored, and it's literally like pulling the feet of the radius over, pulling in a direction of pronation. So as we're spine boarding, we got the body taken care of by the pronator teres. We have the feet taken care of by the pronator quadratus. So here's the pronator teres pulling in a direction of pronation, pronator quadratus distally pulling in a direction of pronation. Obviously, that muscle can have an extra stability component, trying to make sure we don't have a chicken wing effect, right? Trying to make sure that radius and ulna stay together if we fall or outstretched on. And then also distally, we had talked about last class, the brachioradialis can be a pronator in quadrant 1, which makes sense because that's kind of when we want to do the spine board. We want to kind of have extra pronators when we're in quadrant 1 to get to that functional semi-prone position. So as I like to say, we have all the time pronators that have pronator in their name, pronator teres, pronator quadratus, and then we have a sometimes pronator, the brachioradialis. The brachioradialis can work in the pronation club, work in the group, if you need pronators. So there's two factors to this. One, you need pronation pullers, and you got to be in quadrant 1. If you need pronators and you're in quadrant 1, brachioradialis is like, hey, I could be part of the team. But if you need supinators in quadrant 1, doesn't pull like that. On our circles, there's our pronator quadratus and pronator teres. Obviously, this is not drawn to scale because the quadratus is further distal than the teres, but it shows you the pull, shows you the function. Why is if the brachioradialis, this is a question from last class, if the brachioradialis can be a supinator and a pronator, why is it listed in my circle as a pronator? Let's see if you remember that from last class.
That's where it comes from.
Outstanding. Because these circles are referenced from anatomical position, and you're in quadrant 1 in anatomical. That makes sense? If anatomical position was here, there would be no there would be no. And if anatomical position was here, then it'd be listed as a supinator in anatomical. Good. I know sometimes we know it, but it's hard to verbalize it. That's why we said it. All right, guys, the best muscle in the entire body. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the supinator. If you miss this on the test, I only got one thing for you. Shame. Oh, I'm going to shame you. Like Game of Thrones, early Game of Thrones style. What does the supinator do? Your instinct is want to say, well, it supinates. But we've just spent 2 whole semesters saying not all the time. In other words, I can have supination because of pronators, right? So the supinator is called the supinator not because it's always going to be supinating my radioulnar joint, but it's always going to be pulling that way. It always pulls in the direction of supination. Sometimes it can pronate me when it's working eccentrically. Sometimes it can supinate me when it's working concentrically. And sometimes there's not going to be any motion at all while it's still doing a job, preventing me from pronating with an external force, right? So the supinator can be a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it literally has its pull in its name. But the curse is that because it has so much of its pull in its name, our old reflex of saying supinator, supination, that's not necessarily true. That only happens in concentrics. So that's an all-the-time supinator, the supinator. There's also another all-the-time supinator. You guys remember who that was? We've already talked about it. It's very famous muscle. Biceps brachii. Good. Biceps brachii. We talked about how, remember we did this, where you could literally feel it shorten as you supinate, because it's pulling on the inside of the radius, and it's literally, think about how you would start a lawnmower old school style, where you pull on the string and it turns the gears. So that muscle on the inside of the radius is literally trying to unwrap, pulling on the inside of the radius. I showed it to you on the last video if you want to go back and watch it. So you have your all-the-time supinators, biceps brachii, and your supinator. And then you have your sometime supinator, and that's your brachioradialis. For your brachioradialis to be part of that group, two boxes need to be checked. One, you need supinators as an agonist. And the second is you've got to be in quadrant 2. If you need supinators and you're between semi-prone and fully prone, brachioradialis is like, sweet, I can be in this group. I can be a supination puller here. So in this position, biceps brachii, supinator, brachioradialis. In this position, pronator teres, pronator quadratus, brachioradialis. I do not mean brachialis.
Brachioradialis, but I thought brachioradialis is on biceps.
In anatomical position, the brachioradialis can be both. It's a midway muscle.
I thought that was in brachialis.
No. So let's go to, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I want to make sure there is your brachialis. So your brachialis is deep, and it crosses the elbow, and it pulls on the ulna. So because it pulls on the ulna, it can't wrap or unwrap. Now, there is a possibility, you know, ab and adduction, right? I could have said brachialis when I meant to say brachioradialis, and if I did, I'm sorry. One way to think about it is brachialis is a shorter word, and therefore its function is simpler, very simple function. Brachioradialis, much longer word, much more complex function. So let's take a look at that brachioradialis. In fact, brachioradialis, right? Pulling on the radius, and we know the radius grabs the radius. So let's take a look at that brachioradialis. So remember, this is still part of the radius, the radiostyloid. It does not cross the wrist. But because it pulls on that radius, I think I tried to use this last class as an example. So in a semi-prone position, it's like a rectus abdominis, straight across. So all it is in a semi-prone position is a flexion puller, because it can't push me, right? But if I supinate from anatomical, it's a pronation puller. That's quadrant 1. If I pronate from anatomical, it's a supination, quadrant 2. So it can be both. It just can't be both at the same time. Muscles can only pull. So if I'm in quadrant 1, it can be a pronator. And that's why in anatomical position, it's listed as a pronator, because in anatomical position, I'm in quadrant 1. Semi-prone, there's no function other than flexion pull. And then if I'm past semi-prone in the quadrant 2, it's a supinator. Okay. I'm sorry if I accidentally said brachialis. You're welcome. Yeah, brachialis, biceps brachii, brachioradialis. All right, guys, let's go to that practice example, because most students struggle the most with the brachioradialis, and rightfully so. This is, wait, you're telling me that a muscle can have different functions? Yes, but it totally depends on the position. It can't pull and push, but some muscles can swap function based off the position. And if you think about it, that's extra insurance. You're not going to dislocate your radial ulnar joint here, but you might do it there and you might do it here. So having extra muscles to slow down motion at the end of your range of motion, kind of cool. Slowing down motion twisted to the right, having that rectus abdominis be extra help, and that rectus abdominis be an extra help, kind of cool. All right, guys, here's the game. Let's do a full range of motion. So from left to right, we have pronation. We do all of our exercises slow and controlled unless otherwise stated. So we're going to go slow and controlled from the left to the middle to the right. And I want you to be able to tell me the specific muscles now from let's say A, B, and C. From A to B, you're going to have some all the time muscles. And then you say, hey, can the brachioradialis help? And I'm trying to teach you how to see that. Then go from B to C. Identify the agonist. You're going to have some all the time agonists, and then ask yourself, can the brachioradialis help? Make sure to include contractions. And then we'll work our way back. Cool? As always, think about it first, then consult the voices to the side of you or the different voices in your head, because I think that helps for learning. Make mistakes too. I know you know that. Grease. Follow like movies and stuff. I heard last night that Val Kilmer passed away. Val Kilmer passed away. Val Kilmer was a Doc Holliday on Tombstone, played Iceman in Top Gun. He was that on the games. Was that? I said I didn't know that. It was like late. I saw it when I woke up this morning at the past. I didn't know if anybody would know who that was, but it was. Oh my goodness. Was that? Yeah, I think he was battling drug use for a long time. In the new Top Gun movie, he couldn't talk. Remember so they worked a real life issue. Going back to the thing that I'm about. I met him at Comic Con several years ago. She's very, very polite. Yes. In the check box, we had I keep chugging on us. Use that new really real nice. All right, you guys. So from left to middle, does it make sense that I need pronators? Okay. And the motion was pronation. So concentric contraction from left to middle. Now I got to take a little side quest. I'm going to have some all the time pronators. So let me get those out the way. Pronator teres and pronator quadratus. And then I have my sometimes pronator, my brachioradialis. Because I'm in quadrant one and I'm in pronators, it checks both boxes. Brachioradialis can help when you need pronators and when you're in quadrant one. Check and check it. That makes sense. So the brachioradialis will be part of that team from left to right. Any questions or clarifications? Okay, let's continue on. We do not assume. So just because I needed pronators from left to middle doesn't mean I'm going to continue to have pronators from middle to right. If I continue to use those muscles, I'd slam the hammer down. Because although gravity is trying to supinate me in quadrant 1, gravity is actually now trying to pronate me in quadrant 2. So in quadrant 2, now I need supinators. Does that make sense? Supinators are going to allow pronation through eccentrics. So I have concentrics coming up, eccentrics going down. I'm going to have some all the time supinators, my biceps brachii and my supinator. And then I got to ask myself about the brachioradialis. The brachioradialis can be a supinator when I need supinators and I'm in quadrant 2. Check and check. So the brachioradialis, funnily enough, is actually working throughout the entire range of motion in different contractions. Concentric to bring it up and eccentric to lower it down in 2 different groups. Pronator in the first part and supinator in the next part. It's kind of cool. The only time it wouldn't be working was right when you get to the midpoint, right? Coming back up, right to middle, supinators through concentric contraction, checks both of my boxes as a supinator for the brachioradialis. And then middle to right, pronators through eccentric contraction, once again, checks both of my boxes for the brachioradialis. Questions? Clarifications? Would y'all like to hear a few types of ways I can ask? It's all the same stuff, but I can ask it different ways. Let's say I give you information, kind of like in the last test. You're doing an exercise and you're using your pronator agonist. Or I could say you're doing an exercise and your supinator is working as an agonist. And you're in a fully pronated position. Is the brachioradialis helping? In other words, I'm in a fully prone position. So I'm in the position to potentially help. But then I tell you that the supinator is working as an agonist. Oh, that tells me I need supinators, because a supinator is a supinator. So it checks both boxes, right? I'm in the position to help, and I know it's a supinator. So therefore, the brachioradialis can be helping in that scenario. Let me give you some scenarios where it wouldn't help. If I'm doing isometrics and an external force is trying to supinate me and I'm in quadrant 2. Well, if the external force is trying to supinate me here, I need pronation pullers, right? The brachioradialis cannot be a pronator in quadrant 2. Because in this scenario, the brachioradialis is like, dude, I can't push you down. I can only pull you up. Does that make sense? Or in this scenario, if an external force is trying to pronate me and I'm in quadrant 1, I would need supinators in quadrant 1. And the brachioradialis says, dude, I can't push you down. I can only pull you up. Good. I know these midway muscles are weird, but I've introduced you to the fact that they existed. There's not a lot of them. But I think the brachioradialis is a great one to actually apply and see how these things work. Other examples are your pectoralis major. When you're midway, all it's trying to do is pull here. When you're below 90, it's an adduction puller. And when you're above 90, it's an abduction puller. Like, it makes sense. At the end of the day, it's just trying to bring your arm to your body. Down here, that looks like this. And up here, it looks like this. Questions? So utilize your PowerPoint, the one that has the visuals. I just realized that that's more of a reference for those of you that want to see motion with pull. Any questions? All right, so Friday, you tell me, would y'all rather me do scapula or start on the shoulder on Friday? Scapula is actually easier. So do you want the hard stuff or do you want to save the hard stuff for last? You want the hard stuff? All right, got shoulder on Friday. Y'all have a good day. I tell you, I'm gonna let you out early so I can go back to that meeting. Because you know I love meetings. Wah, wah, wah.